The remainder of our topics in Chapter 8 are going to center around a specific pair of chromosomes called sex chromosomes, and also what happens when an individual is born with an abnormal number of chromosomes. So sex in humans is determined by a special pair of chromosomes called the sex chromosomes. These are the X and Y chromosomes. Now, the Y chromosome is actually what determines the sex of an individual. The X chromosome kind of behaves like the rest of our chromosomes. So all of our autosomes, that is to say the non-sex chromosomes, encode a whole variety of genes spread out over the entire genome. All kinds of different traits, from metabolic pathways and the proteins that are involved in building and breaking down the food we eat and the molecules that we need, to physical characteristics that affect our appearance, things like that. So the X and Y chromosome have a very different structure, but they're still considered homologous. They still line up during mitosis and meiosis, but unlike the other pairs of chromosomes, they have a very different genetic makeup. So the X chromosome, as I said, encodes all kinds of different things that really have nothing to do with the sexual characteristics of an individual. The Y chromosome, on the other hand, is the chromosome that determines the sex of a human. So during the process of meiosis, a female who has two X chromosomes donates one X chromosome to each of their eggs. During the process of meiosis in sperm, each of the sperm are either going to get an X or a Y, because just like the other chromosomes, these homologs are separated and split into separate sperm cells. So encoded on that Y are specific characteristics that are for the development of the male sexual organs. So the X chromosome doesn't have this. The X chromosome has just sort of regular genes, just like all of our other autosomes. But the Y chromosome is special in that it actually doesn't contain any genes that are necessary for development of a functioning human. That is to say that females without a Y chromosome are fully functional. And that also means that there are no genes on the Y chromosome that give males any sort of particular advantage. It gives them a different advantage. It makes them male compared to female, but there's really nothing on that Y that is essential. What it is essential for is all of the genes that encode the development of the testes, sperm production, things like that. So a female who doesn't have that Y chromosome is going to develop ovaries, breasts, things like that, and then because of the presence of a Y chromosome in a male, basically those female characteristics are suppressed and the male sexual characteristics develop. So you can kind of think of the default setting as female. Without that Y, everything proceeds towards female. And with that Y, you get the additional characteristics of a male, kind of. It's kind of the general way that it works, kind of the easiest way to explain it. So over here we have a female has her 2 copies of her X chromosome. So all females have 2 copies of an X chromosome. During meiosis, each cell gets one of those X chromosomes. For the males are X and Y, so they have 1 copy of the X chromosome, 1 copy of the Y. During meiosis, those homologs are split up. 1 sperm gets an X, 1 sperm gets a Y. If that sperm with the X chromosome is used to fertilize an egg, that individual is going to be female. So we see here how the male determines the sex of the individual. If the sperm carrying the Y is the one that fertilizes an egg, then we get a male. So again, we can see that by the specific donation of the chromosome in the sperm, we get the sex of the individual. So there are a variety of other ways that occur in producing sex in different species. I'm not really going to go over them here. There's some kind of different examples. The only thing that I'm going to say is that one question I get quite a bit is what causes someone to be a hermaphrodite? And in humans, there are actually no true hermaphrodites. I'll talk about a couple of instances in a minute where individuals might kind of seem to have that condition, but in general, the definition of a hermaphrodite is an individual that is able to produce both male and female gametes. And so sometimes people think that humans can do this. Humans cannot do that. If you're interested in some of these other sex determining methods, you can look them up in the book, but I'm not going to go over them now in the video. All right, so sometimes individuals have a problem where meiosis does not adequately or correctly separate the chromosomes during cell division. So this is a condition called nondisjunction. Nondisjunction is simply any alteration to chromosome number. And this comes about due to unequal distribution of chromosomes during cell division. So I'll show the mechanism for this in just a minute. Basically what happens is you end up with 3 copies of a particular chromosome as opposed to 2 copies. Now, if you end up with one less copy, if you end up with only 1 copy of one of the chromosomes instead of 2, this is always fatal. This is because individuals in some cases can survive with extra genetic information. The body can deal with that extra information better than it can deal with less information. The only survivable trisomies, which is where you have 3 sets of one of your chromosomes, occur on some of the smallest chromosomes. That is to say, the chromosomes with the fewest genetic information. Generally, this problem occurs in the egg, although it could occur in the sperm, but generally it occurs in the egg, and it occurs with an increased frequency as women get older. And this has to do with how the process of meiosis actually occurs in females. Basically, it's arrested for a while and then starts back up during puberty. So the important thing here, though, is the understanding of nondisjunction and the fact that it is an unequal distribution of chromosomes. So let's look at how this happens. So here we have our homologous chromosomes. We've got our homologous blue chromosomes and our homologous yellow or green chromosomes. You can see that the spindles are attached to each set, just as they should be in preparation for pulling those chromosomes apart. But once we start pulling them apart, we see that the blues have separated, but the yellows have not. Now, this often occurs because that spindle attachment is not actually correct. Either it never attaches or it doesn't attach correctly. And so because these guys are held together by their chiasmata, all 4 of those pieces of DNA are pulled that way. So both chromosomes go towards one side of the cell, as opposed to each chromosome being separated. So then, once meiosis 1 finishes, we end up with a cell that is lacking a set of chromosomes and a cell that has gained a set of chromosomes. So once we complete meiosis 2, we end up with an additional set of chromosomes here. So rather than having just 1 copy of each of the greenish yellow chromosomes here and 1 copy of the blue, we end up with 2 copies of the green. Now this is our trisomy situation. Once these gametes fertilize with, let's say this is an egg, and they're fertilized by a sperm, and they get their other green copy, now we are going to have 3 copies of the green and 2 copies of the blue. So I hope you can see where the trisomy comes from. The trisomy does not come from 2 greens and a blue. It comes from 2 greens here and then another green coming in on the sperm. This individual over here is lacking the green chromosomes altogether. So when it is fertilized by fertilized by a sperm, it's only going to get 1 green copy. when the resulting individual should have two. Please let me know if there's some confusion on that. I know our book doesn't show what actually happens here when these are fertilized. So sometimes it's kind of hard to understand where the situation, why the problem occurs after fertilization. The most famous non-disjunction is for chromosome 21. Now, this is a situation known as Down syndrome, also known as trisomy 21, because there are 3 copies of chromosome 21. So this is a fairly common genetic disorder, and the reason is that it's relatively survivable. Again, individuals tend to deal better with extra chromosomes rather than missing chromosomes. And as I said previously, trisomies often occur on smaller chromosomes. So here we have chromosome 1, 2. They're numbered in order by size. We get all the way down. You can see they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Here's chromosome 21. We have 3 copies here. Now this diagram is called a karyotype, and it is basically the condensed chromosomes, metaphase chromosomes, that are getting ready to separate in meiosis. And this is where we can see them the best. So cells are taken from the body and prepared in a way that they are isolated during meiosis 1 when they're nice and condensed. So if you look at these guys, you actually can see the 2 sister chromatids here. You can see it really well on this guy down here because you can see the centromere here. Some of these other ones are a little bit harder to see. You can kind of see it on this one here, 2 chromosomes with the centromere in the middle. So these are homologous pairs of sister chromatids. Now you should have 2 sets, one from mom, one from dad, but here we have the non-disjunction that produces Down syndrome in this situation. So Down syndrome and the other trisomy disorders from non-disjunction actually increase with the age of the mother. And this is really interesting because for a long time they didn't know why this actually happened, and they think that it is due to a problem in meiosis, basically because once puberty hits, males produce sperm their entire life. But for the egg, all of the eggs that a woman is going to release during her lifetime are actually produced at birth. And then meiosis is arrested. And so they believe that this is kind of a breakdown in the function of meiosis. And then once those eggs are released during puberty, they're basically, the older the woman is, the older the eggs are, and the longer they've been sort of sitting in hibernation. So here we have another example of a karyotype. This is a normal chromosome 21, so we only have 2 copies. I would like to point out this is a female karyotype, 2 X chromosomes, and if we go back here, we actually have an X and a Y. You can see that X chromosome is much larger than the Y chromosome. So there are a couple of different ways that you can collect cells from a fetus, and I realize that my videos are quite long for this chapter, so I'm not going to go over them. I'm actually not too worried if you understand these methods, but you're welcome to look them up if it's something that interests you. So because we're talking about chromosome disorders and also sex chromosomes, there are actually a couple of disorders that are related to abnormal numbers of the sex chromosomes. Now these are much more common than abnormal numbers of the other chromosomes, simply because it's more survivable. Because these individuals that Y chromosome is not encoding anything more than male male sexual characteristics, and then again, having extra chromosomes is not necessarily a bad thing. So we have a situation called Turner syndrome, and this is a female syndrome, and this is where the female has only 1 X chromosome. So she doesn't have a Y, so she can't develop into a male, but she doesn't have the other X. So This causes a set of specific characteristics, shortened height, a sort of web of skin around the neck, and then usually these individuals have underdeveloped sexual characteristics and they're often sterile. But besides that, these people can generally function normally. Sometimes there are mental disabilities, learning disabilities associated with these chromosome disorders, but they're kind of limited for Turner syndrome. So the genetic makeup of this individual would just be X. She was not XX like a normal female genotype, but rather only has the one X. Sort of the opposite characteristic is an extra sex chromosome. This is called Klinefelter syndrome. Now, this individual is generally going to develop as a male because he has the Y chromosome. But again, because it doesn't have the right chromosome complement, usually these individuals are infertile and often have underdeveloped sexual characteristics. This syndrome sometimes leads to development of some female characteristics as well. So we saw with Down syndrome and then with these sex chromosome disorders that they are not always detrimental. Individuals can absolutely live and have relatively normal lives with these, especially with different types of treatments and things like that to sort of alleviate some of the symptoms of these characteristics. Now, the range of symptoms or severity of symptoms absolutely depends on the individual. Not all individuals with Down syndrome are going to be affected to the same level and have exactly all of the same problems, but there are still general features of these syndromes.